everybody. We are talking about the Natter mod for DCS. This just came to my attention yesterday. It's a very interesting mod. It's not one that you're going to spend a ton of time in because this guy is pretty much a one-hit wonder. It was designed to do just one thing. There's some other things, since this isn't real life, that you could try to do in DCS because it would be fun. I intend to try some of those things, but I believe, and I don't want to put words in the developer's mouth who made this mod, but I believe the intention was just to kind of study the Natter and test some things out in DCS to see if they could be incorporated into the sim. And I think that that this mod does a good job of that. So the two things that really fascinate me about this mod are the amount of research that went into it and the documentation that the mod creator has on the mod website, which I will link in the description. It's the same place you get the mod. And you can read about the Natter and read about the research that the mod creator went through. And then the second thing, which is equally as intriguing to me, is how these are implemented in DCS. So right here, you see that the aircraft is being aligned with the launch platform. And obviously, this is not the way this would look in real life. There are some limitations with DCS. There's some limitations with how much time would you really want to spend making this stuff as realistic as possible. But the mod does a really good job of lining up with the platform. You don't have to do anything. You can line the aircraft up the direction you want it to face and where you want it placed. And then you hit right Control P, and that spawns the platform and starts the slightly more than 1 minute process of lining the aircraft up with the launch platform. And then you go through the process of launching, which we will talk about here in a minute. Once you're in the air, you basically, in real life, my understanding is you would be controlled via radio and autopilot in the direction of a bomber formation. So you'd be vectored onto the bomber formation. And then once you were close, or at least at altitude, you would turn the autopilot off and the pilot would then fly towards the bomber formation and try to fire these unguided rockets in a single pass at the bombers, hit as much as possible, fly away, descend, kind of level off at a set altitude, and then eject, which is a very interesting ejection sequence that we will also talk about in a minute. And that's all this thing was designed to do. The mod does a good job of that, although it's really hard to hit targets. Let's talk about the process here. We've lined with the runway. You don't have to align with the runway. And we have hit Control P, so we're just waiting for this thing to get where it needs to go on the launch platform. And then the mod is going to tell us that it's ready and that we can launch. You don't really want to hit anything in this part of the process. So the inside of the cockpit is sparse, which I think it would be in real life. Textures are okay. Meshes are okay. One thing that struck me as interesting is those aluminum or seemingly aluminum frames around the window. You can't really click any of this stuff. It's all, keyboard binds and stuff. But these aluminum frames around the window, they look like, somebody just pulled them off a mill and barely cleaned them up and put them in here, which may have been the way that they really looked. But what's cool about that to me is that's basically what this mod is. This is an example of minimum viable product, which is really good. Like that's not a negative thing at all. That's a really cool thing. So anyway, once you're in position and the mod tells you that it's okay to go on, you hit O, you hit backspace. That turns a couple systems on that I can't remember. And then you hit right shift home, which powers the engine on, and you will start to see the lower left dial come up and the center dial come up. You basically want those maxed out. Now, I don't remember what those are. I'm not going into insane detail about this. The one thing I will note is that I was not able to map any of that stuff to my joystick or my throttle. You do then advance your throttle, and then you hit B and you launch. And don't touch any controls. No stick input, no rudder input. It's in autopilot. You're going to get up to a certain speed and the solid booster rockets will automatically jettison. There's a nice little bounce in the cockpit when those jettison, which is really cool. And then you're really just along for the ride for a little bit. Now, you can hit the A button and turn off the autopilot whenever you're ready at this point. I wouldn't do it before the solid rocket boosters disengage, but, you could try it. What's it going to hurt? But you're supposed to get up to, I think, 8,000 meters and then vector onto the bombers. There were times I turned off the autopilot a lot lower than that. You have about 3 to 5 minutes of fuel. I've not done extensive testing, but I didn't really feel like the fuel consumption changed much based on my throttle settings. It didn't seem like it did. It might, but it didn't seem like it did. I assume that you use most of your fuel getting to altitude anyway, so it may not matter. But we've just turned our autopilot off, nose down gently, and at this point you've really got to watch the overspeed. It gets up to about 800 kilometers per hour, and then it starts beeping at you. It can go faster than that, but I assume that it's really not supposed to. You can read in the documentation about more specifics of that kind of stuff, but the arming is pretty simple. There's a button for master arm, and there's a button for salvo mode, and then there's a button to launch the rockets. And that's about it. Now that switch down there that you saw moving, I don't really know what it's doing. It seems to have a mind of its own. Also, salvo mode is a little bit weird. It will either fire all of the rockets or one of the rockets, and I could not get the salvo mode joystick button to work. I had to use the T on the keyboard and then just check if it said single or all in the upper corner of the screen. Now, it's really hard to hit targets. Really, really hard to hit targets. The other thing is, if you take a single bullet or two, you're going to explode. That's just end of story. You're going to explode. So you want to try to just come up where you're less vulnerable to defensive fire. This replay is way off. I didn't hit in that particular sequence, but they were off further than they should have been. So here we get some hits, but these apparently don't do that much damage. It is easy to black out in this aircraft. It really is. It's not too bad. It's actually not as bad as the VSN F4 Phantom mod in that regard, but when you fire the first rocket, the nose cone jettisons. That's kind of interesting. So flying around in this mod is somewhat fun. You don't have that much playtime. I guess you could set it to unlimited fuel. That might be kind of fun to fly around with unlimited fuel and unlimited weapons and just see what you could get away with. But it actually handles relatively well, and I've obviously never flown in one of these. To my knowledge, the one guy who did died. I've never flown one, but the flight model seems okay. So you can do ground attack in this. It's kind of hard to do because it's hard to line up. There's not a lot of rudder authority. But once you get lined up on something, you do have some unguided rockets that you can fire at stuff, and you can make little adjustments, and you can actually hit targets with it by walking the rockets onto the target. So that's actually kind of fun. That's something I foresee doing a few times just to be fun, just to have a little fun with it. You can do loops. I mean, this thing is a powerhouse. You kind of got to be careful with it, but it can do loops. It can handle itself okay for what it is, and so it can be a little bit fun to fly around. But just remember that that's not at all what this aircraft was designed to do, and I don't think it ever did it. They had glider tests and they had some launch tests and things like that, but this thing never made it into production. And if it did, you really wouldn't be flying it around like this. Let's talk about the ejection sequence. So when you would go to eject in one of these, you would basically the nose cone would pop off. It jettisons any rockets that it has left and pops the nose cone off, and the front of the aircraft would actually come off. and then a drag parachute would come out the back of the aircraft, and the pilot's momentum would carry the pilot out the front of the nose. Now, this isn't supremely shown in DCS or animated in DCS. I'm okay with that. The process is generally correct in DCS, and so the mod creator had to kind of like work with what DCS allowed to make that happen. Another thing, I don't know if this would have had any kind of oxygen or anything like that, but I tried to take it up to altitude, and you do start getting what, if I remember correctly, this would be called hypoxia, but basically a lack of oxygen. This is something that's implemented in DCS, and I don't know how it would be applied to each module, but I did black out, and I blacked out for a very long time, and I kind of thought that I would be dead whenever I came back down to Earth. I did not set any altitude records in this thing because of that issue, because of the fact that I blacked out. So there's that. And again, the real ejection sequence is jettison any remaining rockets, pop the nose of the aircraft off, a parachute comes out, and then the pilot gets launched out the front of the nose, and then his parachute would deploy, or he would pull it. Now, I did have this interesting thing happen. After I ejected this one time, I didn't have it happen any other times. At a point, all of a sudden, the plane started going way up in the air, and then it got so fast it blew up. I don't know what that's all about. But this was a fun mod, and I appreciate the efforts of the mod creator doing the work to research this and to implement it into DCS, like I said, about as well as you could possibly implement it in DCS. Sure, you could refine some things, you could make it work a little bit better or a little bit more realistically in some aspects, but again, minimum viable product. This thing does what it's supposed to do, and it doesn't really need to do anything else because the real aircraft was never meant to do anything else. And so from that aspect, like, this thing is a pretty complete mod in all aspects that really matter. And it's just interesting. So if you want, go download it and enjoy. I'm kind of curious what kind of crazy things people are going to do with this mod, because you could do some crazy stuff with it if you wanted. But that's it from me. I'm signing off. Thanks for watching. Happy flying.